And so much can come up with touch, even self-touch. So much can come up. You can touch your own arm and have so many different feelings because you haven't done that,
Mhm.
necessarily before. And it can. I was surprised through doing this work myself that, like, wow, like so much is locked in my body. Like personally, at least for me,
Mhm.
so much was locked in. Like I feel like one touch from you and I would just like burst into tears.
Mhm.
So I mean that's just me. But yeah, it's amazing what can be explored and what can come up from doing this work.
Yeah, 1,000%. And on the topic of touch, I feel like there's this maybe not misconception, but there's this like stigma around the word touch itself.
Mm,
Like, I feel like when you're talking about we need to touch more, I feel
yeah.
like people misunderstand that and kind of think of it in a sexual light.
Mhm.
When in reality, you have all, like you said, touching an arm or arm over the shoulder,
Mhm.
shaking hands, high fiving, like all these minor forms of touch are so important. So how
Mhm.
how do you guys think we can remove that stigma around the word touch?
I think perspective has to do with a lot of any sort of change we're looking in our lives, and even with this, I feel like you'll be excited to hear. Like, yeah, there have been studies, uh, in the NBA looking at teams in preseason, like how they were, and what they were noticing was that teams that kind of participated in more like celebratory touch, like a pat on the shoulder, pat on the bum, high five, all these sort of things. It created more connection, more synchronicity in the teams, and they performed better in the following seasons, regardless of how they did in the previous seasons, than teams that were kind of more stoic and non-touch oriented. And then yeah, even with the stigmatization of touch being kind of pigeonholed into sexuality, even when we look at how we use the word touch linguistically, like we talk normally about getting back in touch, touching base with someone, dipping our toes into something, getting a feel for a project. it, Touch is something that is, I feel like, is already subtly just part of our language. And yet, when it comes to the physical aspect of touch, when we start, like, even if when I say the word relationship, people are always almost going to bring that towards romantic relationship. When for me, I've often looked at relationship as the ability to relate with another. Um, in the same way that if I thought about sensuality, I've always thought about sensuality as developing sensual awareness, not just this sensual pseudo sexual approach to something. So yeah, with the sexuality and touch, yeah, that is something that comes up as, and I think that's why we say, like, it's, you're free to say what is coming up in that area. It's not that we would explore that. Um, this is more just an area. This is more, again, a place to practice what it means to kind of notice if you have, like, just notice what comes up in touch. Because something I could say is that I know when I started dancing, something I felt very intensely was how much my body connected touch with sexuality, and it felt separate from my mind and my intentions. And I put a lot of practice into, like, noticing, like, okay, but like this isn't what's happening here. So like, why is my body responding this way, without shame, but that opened me up way more to be able to just be affectionate with men and women. I'm heterosexual, but just being able to hug men in a different way without feeling like, without worrying about how I would come across. Um, Really, I don't know, it changed a lot for me. And I think that's, again, like something we try to offer. We did have this one client. This is pretty common. We had this one client that was very much so similar to, like, he brought up what you were saying, like feeling very much so like he couldn't he couldn't really touch like friends or anyone because, like, I only reserve touch for like relationship. It's kind of like in a hushed voice, like that's only for
Mhm.
relationship. But then as soon as we had a session together, this was like pre-lockdown, like very early on in COVID. um he was, yeah, he was expressing like, wow, like you feel like a brother to me. I feel supported. I've also had other guys, that will say, like, it's amazing to feel a guy's support because he can feel that kind of grounded nature that I bring. And it lets him know, like, oh, I don't have to be like the strong one, you know? So even under kind of normal, like traditional masculine values, it ends up being subverted. And you end up kind of noticing, like, oh, it can feel good to kind of have that other masculine energy that you don't have to end up feeling like you have to dominate. You can just kind of lean into and be supported by.
Mhm. And something that we're really trying to bring light to is the whole spectrum of non-sexual intimacy,
Mm,
and really giving a space for people to explore that and see what is possible and available within that space, because it's not something that we think about too much. We really, a lot of people tend to think of like either it's nothing or sex, and
mm,
there's not very much in between. And even for the people that are in relationships, it could be good to explore that and to see what's there.
mhm,
So we are trying to bring a lot more light to this, a lot more light to what is possible within that space. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, that's the problem, right? There's like this line of on one end it's no touch at all, on the other end it's like sex in relationships. And what you
Mhm.
guys are doing is like finding the stuff in between. Like
Mhm.
that's so important because I know a
Mhm.
lot of friends who um their entire relationship was just sex. Like they barely talk to the partner. They barely like other than that sex for however long, like there was no other forms of affection. You could
Mhm.
just tell it was like weighing on both of them. Like
Mhm.
it's so important to explore that.
Mhm.
mhm,
And people may be worried that they will become attached in that space. But again, this is a space to explore and to practice.
mhm,
So if feelings of like, yeah, really feeling like attachment to us comes up, that is also something that we can explore, because
mhm,
it's something that is important. If you're always going to feel like you get attached to people when you're kind of within that non-sexual space, then that's something that's important to look at. So
mhm,
it's not that we if feelings come up that we will reject them. Like, of course not, we'll talk about them. We won't engage in anything sexual, but we are open to talking about that if that
mhm,
is something that
mhm.